And that's, again, why most loan officers can't get to that level, because either they can't justify paying someone enough, because you got to find somebody good to do that role. But what we found is that now the opportunities we're developing are doubled, because now I have his time and my time.
You are listening to the Loan Officer Strategy Session podcast, where top producers answer your mortgage origination questions. To get your questions answered, check out our Facebook group, Loan Officer Strategy Sessions, or submit direct to the website for upcoming episodes at lostrategysessions.com. Now, here's your host, Andrew Sauce.
Welcome to the Loan Officer Strategy Session podcast. I am Andrew Sauce, your host. Well, this week on the show, we've got Mark Maimon. Mark is a fascinating loan originator who has a very unique business model in that all of his business is done in New York City. However, he lives in Los Angeles. So he was able to pick up, move out here, and still retain a ton of business in New York City. His wife wanted to become an actress, and so they did that and moved out here. So it goes to show you that you don't have to follow a conventional plan. And so we talked a lot about the New York City mortgage market, which I found fascinating because it's totally different than most areas of the country. But I think you can still pick up a lot of nuggets on how he has niched himself out and how he has been able to do a ton of business with fairly minimal staff. So very, very interesting conversation. I hope you will enjoy it as much as I did. Again, welcome to the show, Mark Maimon. Okay, we're here with our guest, Mark Maimon with Freedom Mortgage. Mark, how are you?
Hello, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you so much for joining us. Excited to talk to you. I was introduced to you through my former coach, Mark Maneri. So apparently he only hangs out with Mark M's.
Apparently.
I know that he's spoken with you a number of times and said that you would be a good person to talk to on our podcast. So I'm glad that we're able to schedule some time. What I know about you is that you're unique in that you are bi-coastal, right? You live in, correct me if I'm wrong, you live in Southern California, but most of your business is in New York?
That's correct. Yeah.
In the whole state of New York or Manhattan?
Primarily New York City. I would say the majority of our business is Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Westchester County.
Got it. And how did that come about? You living out here and doing all your business out there? Were you out there originally?
Yeah, it didn't always used to be that way. So I was living in New York for almost 10 years, and that's where I started my career in the mortgage industry. And, family situation and my wife being a comedic actress, her career pulled her more towards LA, and I figured I could give it a shot and try to do it remotely, which I've now been doing for 10 years.
So what's that like for you logistically? Are you back in town often? Is your team back in New York still? How does that work?
Yeah, so my entire team is actually based in New York City and the surrounding areas, with the exception of one team member who is not client-facing, who's actually in Wisconsin. We're all over the place, but technology is such nowadays that you don't really need to be physically in the same place as the people you're working with every day. And I've fortunately hired well over time, at least ended up with really solid people to where they're not the type of people who need me looking over their shoulder to be motivated. So it's actually worked out really well. But yeah, so I lived primarily in New York for many years, almost 10 years, and built my business out there, and decided to take the leap of, it was either my job or my wife. So I chose both, and decided to come out to Southern California and look at palm trees out my window when I'm working. And it's been great ever since. Our business has grown, more or less every year since then. So we've made it work. And all the paranoia I had about people not wanting to do business with me anymore because I wasn't physically in the same location as them really didn't come to be at all. People really didn't care, which I was pleasantly surprised about. Yeah. But we found ways to make my name heard a lot more and be present, even though I'm not physically present. Having my presence felt in those areas has always been something that is really important, and technology has allowed me to maintain New York phone numbers and also an LA phone number, and make sure that people feel like I'm there even if I'm not.
So I've got a million questions for you because I'm sure
Sure.
this is something that a lot of people have thought about before and maybe even feel, our audience is full of loan officers, right? So it's going to be across the board. There's going to be some people who are born, raised, never leaving their town and have no intentions to.
Sure.
This may not apply to them, but I'm sure there's a lot of people, myself included, who have theorized about picking up and moving elsewhere, but feel maybe a little bit stuck simply because of the nature of, you've built your whole business in a certain area and don't feel like you want to just leave that. So I've got a bunch of questions about sort of how this worked for you. So
Sure.
Your team's back there, you're out here. Do you do any business in California at all? Like, are you building out your business in California? Or it's 100%?
I am slowly but surely, but for the sake of having a little bit of a life outside of work, which is always hard in our business to have already, I primarily work New York hours, and I'm up and working at 5:30 in the morning. But I also have a lot of coaches will tell people, you need to have life-work balance, and I'm definitely a proponent of that. So I've actually intentionally chosen not to fully go full steam ahead after the LA business.
Yeah.
I have some contacts that have kind of come my way naturally through people I know or friends or people in my kids' school or whatever
Family.
it may be.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I'll follow those connections, but I'm not out there, actively going after the business
pursuing it.
aggressively.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's just a life choice. My kids are young. I've got an 8-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to work primarily from home. So I get to spend a lot of time with them, and it's time I'll never get back. So whatever I give up in, income is well rewarded in my relationship with my family.
Yeah,
so,
no, that's interesting. Great. Yeah. So you've got a family out here. You've sort of, I guess, systemized out your way of structuring your work-life balance by just not taking on a bunch of LA business. So that's, or Southern California business. So that's an interesting way of doing that by keeping your New York hours. So that's one of the other questions I was going to ask, is that you're up early and you're done early. That gives you a little bit of an afternoon, which is got to be nice, especially with the kids.
It's been great. It's been a nice side benefit that I didn't really anticipate up front, of just the schedule that I can keep and, pretty much shut down, at least in terms of client calls, around 5 p.m. locally, which is 8 o'clock in New York, which is roughly when things start to quiet down there. Yeah. So it's been a nice, it affords me the ability to be present around dinner time, which is an important time when you have young kids. So
exactly. So let's talk a little bit about, it's kind of an enigma to me, the New York mortgage market. I actually I've talked to people across the country, and I don't know that outside of one other person, I know anybody that really focuses solely on that business. I know that it is kind of its own beast. I know that there's a lot of mortgage banking companies and that don't really even enter specifically the Manhattan market. I believe it's dominated by a few big players. Is that accurate? So why don't you just give me kind of the landscape of what that looks like? Obviously, it's a lot of condos and co-ops and stuff like that. It's a little bit different than your typical track home, new construction type of deal. So talk to me about what doing mortgages in New York is like for you.
Sure. So it's harder. Not to say that everyone else's job in this business isn't hard already, but the nuance is that the vast majority of properties out there are co-ops and followed by condos and then houses. Yeah. So when we get a house transaction, it's like, exciting.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, because when you're doing co-op and condo business, not only does your buyer have to get approved, but the building has to get approved as well. Yeah. And there's a high concentration of buildings that don't meet traditional criteria, which has been a little bit of a nice niche for us. You'd asked about the landscape of the market. I think it's all related here, is that it is dominated primarily by the big banks. Wells Fargo's, Chase's, Citibanks of the world, Bank of America is starting to work their way in, but is still sort of seen a little bit as an outsider because they're not based there physically. But those banks are very aggressive. It's a lot of retail banks. It's a lot of higher net worth people in general. So those banks love that business because they go after the deposits and the relationship. And
of course.
So we compete with that as a primarily correspondent lender and a broker, which is what we are at Freedom. we don't have deposits, so it's hard to compete on a price basis with depository type of banks that can shave rates in exchange for deposits.
Of course.
So it's a ultra competitive market. The vast majority of people that are getting accepted offers are very, very well qualified and could pretty much get a mortgage from anywhere.
Yeah. Even though they're actually probably a lot more complicated.
Correct.
Transactions. So it's the combination of, like, I'm in a jumbo market as well, although we have some, quite a bit of non-jumbo stuff too. Interesting, just as a sidebar, the interesting thing about people who are super qualified but super complicated is that they think that the real world is like the mortgage world, and it's not. And
right.
And so they are expecting a super easy, smooth, slam dunk transaction because, they've got $3 million in the bank and they're putting 50% down. Why is this hard? Well, it's hard because you have 9 different S corps that you're 22.5% owner of each, and they've got money flowing. It's just not that they don't qualify. It's just that it's super complicated. So we're running them through the ringer because that's what we need to do these days to make it. We can't make a common sense decision necessarily. We have to cross T's and dot I's. And so part of that is some expectation setting up front, but it is much more challenging than even somebody who, like, real world is less qualified, right? You've got maybe somebody who's got $25,000 to their name and a 643 credit score, but a W-2 straight salary job and not a lot of moving pieces. Like, we'll close that thing in 2 weeks.
Correct.
Versus
the hardest people I've found to get mortgages for are people in private equity, because their income comes and goes. The entities that they get income from come and go every 2 years, seemingly, which of course is the amount of time that most banks want to see the income continue for.
Of course.
And also people who develop property, who buy and sell, they'll flip or whatever. And they'll, it's hard to get banks these days to look at things on an aggregate basis as opposed to nitpicking about each individual entity. So you have to find the relationships that will look at the bigger picture.
Preaching to the choir, my friend.
Yes, I imagine so.
Probably a little less complicated than yours. But yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. That was just a sidebar of the nature of jumbo complicated files on top of complicated actual property specifics that we don't necessarily run into. Like, the property for us is the easy part. So talk to us about that. So, like, if you get a building has to get approved with the lender. So I'm sure that provides some niche-y things for you outside of just rate.
It does. And that, as difficult as it can be sometimes, has given us a place in the market where we can be creative and more advantageous for an agent who may be selling in a building that doesn't meet traditional criteria.
Yeah.
So it does create a pretty significant amount of extra work. What we find is that most of the management companies who manage these buildings could really care less about what you need and how fast you need it.
Yeah.
So a lot of our team's time, unfortunately, Freedom has a great co-op and condo group who collects documents for us, but these poor people are chasing down paperwork often. So it's a tough business to work on because there is so much intricacy. And what we also have to figure out is not only do the buyers have to meet the bank's criteria and the building has to meet the bank's criteria, but the buyer also has to be approved by the co-op board. And the co-op board requirements are twice as strict, if not more, than the bank requirements are.
Wow.
So when we're advising a client who calls us and say, I'm looking at co-ops and condos. Now, condos don't have the same type of review by the board that a co-op does. Co-ops are much more particular.
Yeah.
So whereas a bank may lend, 80% financing on a certain purchase price, the co-op may only allow 50% in some cases. Some of them don't even allow financing at all.
Wow.
And it's basically a mechanism for these co-ops to control who their neighbors are. They really want very wealthy people, and that's how they make sure of it. And they'll decline people that they don't like, either personally or financially. They're very particular about the financial qualifications. Yes. Oh, yeah. I mean, we've seen, major celebrities get denied by co-op boards. Clearly, it has nothing to do with their finances.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
So it creates a lot of additional nuances. The timing of the transaction is really complicated because you have to get to a certain point of the mortgage application process before they can even submit the appropriate documentation to a co-op board. And then you need to wait for them to get a meeting with the co-op board, which sometimes can take a month or two. So the amount of time you have that transaction is longer in New York City. The average closing is about 60 to 90 days from contract to closing. And keep in mind, if you're in a price sensitive environment where people are generally well qualified in terms of their personal finances, the longer you have to keep that client engaged, the harder it is to make sure that they're all of a sudden their hidden cousin who's in the mortgage business doesn't get into their ear.
Time kills all deals, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Anyone who has we should ask that question. All of us in our industry should ask that question up front on an application. Do you have any relatives in the mortgage business?
That's right.
Because if so, please call them now.
Should be on the 1003 for sure.
Exactly. Because
Really
I don't want to find out about it a month and a half into the transaction. We've done everything right, and then we lose.
It's funny you say that from a timing perspective, and we've certainly realized that as well. And it's kind of the hidden benefit of our market, which it sounds like it's definitely quite a bit different than what you're dealing with from a timing perspective. Everything is pushed quicker and quicker and quicker here, like very, very quick close of escrows. We've got a lot of cash buyers that we're competing with, so we're kind of on the opposite side of trying to shorten that as much as possible, closing in 10 to 14 days, financing.
Oh, God.
And
sounds
amazing.
amazing.
You're probably like, that would be amazing, right? Yeah. And the byproduct of that is, there is less time for Uncle Jimmy to come in and swoop in and try to snake that deal. So yeah, it's just totally different. I can imagine that would be difficult to keep everything on track for that long. And
it is.
At the same time, that does provide you some high barriers to entry. Like, I'm not going to go figure out how to do a loan in New York, even if I were licensed there. I'm going to refer that out. So I would imagine that you probably get a decent amount of business referred to you from other loan officers who don't know the nuances of that and happen to have a client going to New York. That might be a good source for you, right?
Yes, we do. We definitely do. I have some contacts from my own coaching community, and Mark has put me in touch with some people, and as have other coaches I know who I've worked with for years as well. So there's definitely a bit of a moat around New York City where people who don't do business there, maybe they can do business, but they probably shouldn't because they don't know how to properly advise. But, that's one of the selling points that we have is a lot of the larger institutions they'll assign loan officers from other states to do co-op loans, and they'll say, hey, we can do co-ops. That just because you can do them doesn't mean you're any good at it or that you know how to advise.
I mean, we've
had situations.
I'm licensed to do reverse mortgages, but I don't. So
Exactly. You gotta focus on what you do really well and not try to be a jack of all trades, because that's where you end up being an expert in nothing.
Sure. So I would imagine if you've got certain buildings that have some specifics to them that, and these buildings might have 10 units up to 500 units, right? So
correct.
I would imagine that you might find a building that you guys can do and get it done versus, some other big banks can, or you have some sort of niche. How aggressive are you in then remarketing to that building, saying that you can get stuff done? I would imagine that would be probably the first place that I would look for, is like, where's my specific property niche where I'm going to have some captive audience?
Yes, we do. Actually, we have, it's a very unofficial term for this initiative, but we have what we call our crappy building marketing letter. Crappy,
I can imagine
banks don't like it.
Some flyers, right?
Yes, we don't quite call it that on the flyer that we send out.
Some poop emoji.
Yes, exactly. And
That's
when I
funny.
say crappy, I really mean the word that starts with an S.
Yeah,
But,
got it.
it's on a private server, so nobody ever sees it.
That's right.
No, I'm kidding, of course. But so we definitely go after that market. That is a lot of our business ends up being, we do the prime stuff, but anyone, to be honest, can do that.
Sure.
Where we sell ourselves, when we're in conversations with an agent or a financial advisor or a business management firm, whatever it is, CPA, we don't sell ourselves on the straightforward stuff. My general pitch is anyone can do that. You don't need me for that. You need me for the client who doesn't meet the traditional criteria. Your celebrity client who missed a mortgage payment last month, and the traditional banks who would love their $5 million in their bank but still won't give them the loan because they're new to the country. That type of situation, we can really come through for people, both in terms of buildings, problems with the building itself, where the building doesn't have high owner occupancy ratios or whatever it may be. And also, loan and client related issues that we have the ability to work around. So we sell ourselves on giving advice that's much more well-rounded than if you were to apply with a traditional bank.
Interesting.
Because we have so many different options through both our correspondent and wholesale channel.
And wholesale. So from a breakdown of that, it was actually the perfect segue. The next question I was going to ask is your sources for these things is a big selling point, your ability to find a solution for, a client for a non-standard scenario, like you said, a missed mortgage payment or something specifically with the building. What's the percentage of stuff that you have corresponded in-house versus having to broker it out?
We do the majority of it through our correspondent channel. We have some pretty flexible correspondent relationships, and we've built on it. So I've been at Freedom now for a couple of years, and it's been a work in progress to get them used to the type of business that we do, because they acquired our group, and so they had a little bit of a learning curve, as did we. With any new change in company, I think that's inherent.
Sure.
But we brought some of the investors that we had previously and whatnot. So we've intentionally gone after investors that we know will be a little more flexible, because it's in line with our business. And Freedom's been great and very receptive and adding new relationships. So I would say the vast majority, probably 90%, is through our correspondent channel, but that includes correspondents who do some of the quirkier stuff.
Yeah. So you bring on, it's almost like a wholesale relationship, but you brought them on in-house so you can have some of the benefits of the correspondent piece of it.
Yes. And some of them don't even have a wholesale option. They're strictly correspondent. And some of our brokers are strictly broker. They don't have a correspondent option. So, but a lot of I would say we get through most of the niche stuff with our correspondents. The extra niche stuff is usually through our broker channel, where, most banks have a hard time contemplating keeping certain loans on their books. When we really need to go well outside of the box, that's usually where we end up brokering more of our transactions. It ends up being about 10%.
Interesting. So with 60 to 90 day turn times, your pipeline in terms of in-process pipeline must get pretty inflated, right? Most people I think have I'd say across the country, kind of more of a 30 to 40 day turn time on a given transaction. In California, we're closer to like a 20 to 30 day, I'd say on average. Some of us even quicker. I find that turning a pipeline over quickly keeps me out originating and not bogged down with the stuff. So when we get into different markets where the turn times are longer, or maybe it's more of a refinance market where, just turn times are longer in those markets anyway, I see my pipeline ballooning. And, in the back of my head, I'm like, okay, I'm dealing with a lot of the in-process stuff that I don't necessarily like or want to be dealing with. But you're having to do that to keep it moving through. And so I think in the back of my head, I'm like, not originating as hard. And one of the benefits of turning over a pipeline quickly is that you're unemployed every 15 days now instead of every 45 days.
You can't see your next paycheck.
Yeah. I had this situation, and we're recording this mid-April here. I had this situation in mid-March. Basically, I was looking at, we're gonna have a really nice big March, funding about 13 million in March, which is really good for us. And I was looking at my April. I'm like, oh, I've got 4 loans on the books for April. This is great. So so that got me pretty motivated to sort of get out of my own way and go get some stuff. And so now I was able to get enough in. We're gonna have a decent April. My question, that's a long way of asking my question for you, is how many files can you guys handle at any given time? If you're talking about 60, 90 days and 3 to 4 times the work, it sounds like, than a normal transaction that we're used to. Do you have to have extra staff? I'm assuming you have to have extra staff to deal with that. And what's that do to a cost structure? And we don't have to get into sort of your economics, but it's got to be more expensive to originate. And therefore, I would assume a little bit higher margin, which is counter to the fact that it's super competitive. So that must be interesting balancing act for you.
It's a challenge, and our model only works with certain banks. It probably doesn't work in the retail banking world because there's not enough basis points to go around. But
let me interrupt you there. When you say your model, you mean the crappy building model, right?
Well, no, not necessarily that, but the way that I've structured my team. So we do have a pretty large team, and we do, depending on the year, anywhere between 170 and 300 transactions, depending on what's going on in the marketplace. So our team consists of myself. I have 2 people that strictly support business development, who do not actually speak to clients and deal with individual loans or documentation or anything like that. I then have 3 loan officers underneath me who basically take from initial pre-qual, which I typically take, they take the loan all the way through closing along with the processor. So I try to have that initial conversation. I poke my head in when I need to, but I try to have it somewhat end after the initial call, with the exception of the milestones where you poke in and say, congratulations, and you call the agent, tell them, hey, your buyer's approved, those sorts of things. So I try to have some touches along the way so that it feels like I'm involved, but I'm not doing everything myself. So part of your question earlier was the ups and downs of having a larger pipeline, and how do you manage that? And how do you keep from, and I think this is a problem that a lot of originators have, and we turned a major corner once we figured this out in terms of our volume. But what we were finding is exactly what you were describing. This is maybe 5 years ago, where we would do great with originations, and our pipeline would grow and grow and grow. And then we'd hit this peak where we just didn't have time to originate because we were so bogged down with getting those loans done that the origination stopped as the closings were going up. And you see this graph, it's like 2 lines going in opposite directions of each other. And then what happens is when you look at your numbers over the course of a year, if you chart it out month by month or quarter by quarter, you're having these constant peaks and valleys. You're like, oh, well, we did, 20 million this month, but then we did 6 million the next month. And then, somewhere in between. And then you see the exact same pattern over and over and over again. So what we did is
the mortgage roller coaster.
Exactly. And it's very common. And it's honestly, I think the biggest reason why most originators don't go beyond a certain level, because they either are afraid to hire other people to help, or they don't realize that they need help. But my take in general is you hire another person when you have enough to keep them busy half the time, because you'll find ways and business building opportunities to fill the other half. So I hire before I really need somebody full time. I'll hire another person to bring them in, and they'll sort of, if they're motivated enough on their own, they'll find a way to push you to find new opportunities for them to pursue.
The interesting piece about this, so just so you know, my audience will be familiar with this at this point, because I think it seems to come up on every podcast that I do, but I'm a big fan of hiring in advance of growth. And I think that operations staff is actually a bigger driver of growth in some ways than sales staff. Meaning, if you put the right person in ops, you're actually hiring a salesperson. And who's that salesperson? It's you, or whoever was supposed to be in sales that's doing ops. So I feel like when I bring in somebody to help the ops staff, even if it's not something that I was directly doing, there's this like backwards chain that happens of like, so I brought in a junior processor to free up time for my senior processor, because I felt like I was hopping in and helping my senior person solve some of these problems that she could now solve or get ahead of if she had a little bit more time not chasing small, entry level type of stuff. So in a weird way, like for X amount per hour, and I won't say how much, but less than what I make or what I should be making, I'm freeing up an extra 5 or 6 hours a week from me. Not that I was doing those low level stuff, but it sort of worked its way backwards to that. So I'm a big fan of doing that in advance of growth. Now, the hard part is that, like, if you do that enough, you can justify each individual hire. Then you look at it in the aggregate and you're like, oh man, I have 8 people and we did, 19 loans last month. Like, that's a pretty bad ratio in general. But so you can get caught on the wrong end of an economic flip as well. So you have to be careful on that. But in general, I think that the bigger mistake, the 99% of, I think at this point, not just individual loan officers and teams, but companies in general make, is that they are a little bit too short-sighted when it comes to appropriately staffing for where they want to be, not staffing necessarily for where they are. And I think the mistake is much, much more expensive when you're understaffed and you're delivering poor service, or you're leaving deals on the table because you're not motivated to go get them because you're solving these problems, than it is to have an extra person or extra half a person or even extra 2 people based upon what you have to pay them.
Exactly.
That's my take on it. And I may
No,
take that a little too
definitely
far,
agree.
but I think we're definitely on the same page there.
Yeah, and it's a common issue with, loan officers who want to push themselves to a different level. It's why you see the vast majority of loan officers cap maybe somewhere around 50 million. And then you start to, if you look at the Scotsman Guide list, you start to see where people have maybe overcome that issue.
Yep.
So the way that we've done it is that, and this is partly because I live on the opposite end of the country and I can't physically be in New York for every meeting and opportunity, but I basically have a right-hand man whose sole job is to go out and meet people and shake hands and take people to lunch. And he is strictly in business development. I don't allow him to work any applications at all because I don't want him to be tied to a desk. I don't want him to rush back to an office because he has so many calls to return from clients and he has a rate lock he has to get. That was the biggest mistake. And that's, again, why most loan officers can't get to that level, because either they can't justify paying someone enough, because you got to find somebody good to do that role, obviously. But what we found is that now the opportunities we're developing are doubled, because now I have his time and my time to go after it. So I pay him pretty well, but he affords me, first of all, the lifestyle that I have enjoyed out in California. But also what he's done is he's helped me level off those peaks and valleys, because no matter what's happening with our originations, he's always going to be out there promoting our business and building new opportunities for us.
Yeah, he doesn't have a roller coaster because he doesn't have that. He's always just on the sales side. So I'm correct. It's crazy, this being our first conversation, of like how much of this like business thesis we have in common. I did the same thing. So I find that you get to a certain amount. I think it's somewhere in the 10 to 12 loans a month, whatever that is for your area. For you, it's probably 15 million, right, in volume. And then for most people, that might be 2 or 3 million in volume. But you get to some level, wherever that is, 10 to 15, I think, is kind of that number. And you kind of have to decide who you want to be. Are you the inside loan structure talking to a client person, or are you the outside kissing babies, shaking hands, developing relationships person? And I think it's very difficult to do both of those well. So I think that I've seen success on either side of that. And this is the first time I feel like I've seen somebody succeed actually outsourcing both of those roles, which is impressive.
Thanks.
And really you're still doing some of that outside salesperson. Doesn't sound like you're doing a whole lot of the inside structuring, and you've got a really strong team behind you on that. So you just further developed, replicated yourself, both geographically. Having somebody physically there is important, and then also just a similar role where that person's out there. The hard part, where most people, I think, struggle with that, is how do you pay that person? You obviously want them to be incented on, some sort of commission and growth of the team. But at the same time, it's going to be difficult if they're doing it right. It's going to be difficult to pay them on just the residual business that they bring in. In terms of tracking it, right? Because
it's almost impossible.
Yeah, because you really want them to not only be developing new business, but further developing maybe some existing relationships that you aren't getting all you can get out of, right?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. That's a very big part of it.
So you can't just say, okay, we're at X. Here's my list of 30 realtors that I work with, and like anybody new that you bring in, I'll pay you. Like you would pay them more on something that they brought in that was totally brand new. But how do you, like, fast forward 5 years, they bring in a realtor who's sending you 8 deals a year, and then that one of those deals refers you to their sister. Well, does that go back to him, or was that done because your team did such a good job and you did a good job? And so it's very difficult to backwards calculate that.
Right. So the way that we've structured it for that exact reason is that everything he does is for the team, and vice versa. So there is no differentiation with me and my right hand who's out there promoting our business. There is no differentiation between anything he brings in versus what I bring in. Whether it be a relationship with a referral source or a client. He gets paid basically a percentage of the business. So the way that we have it structured is we have a certain number of basis points that get shared between our team. We have, I won't get into too many details here, but the way it works is that we pay out our internal loan officers for every loan that they work on. There's no salaries for anyone who's in sales. We're all in it together, and that's intentional. And basically whatever is left after we pay our loan officers their share, we split between me and him 70-30.
Got it.
So,
And so he walked into, I'm sure before you had him, my guess is that you already had a pretty robust business.
we did. He was, he started as we joke about this all the time. He was the assistant to the admin assistant when he first started.
He's the
But
assistant
that was
assistant.
10 years ago.
That's funny.
He's certainly come a long way and done great, and is now a known name in our market along
Sure.
with me. And we brand ourselves together. We have joint business cards. I don't have my own business cards anymore because I want people to know that he and I are tied. So all of our marketing materials have both of our headshots on them, not just mine. And fortunately, I've known him pretty much his whole life. So, there's a big trust factor there, which is very hard to find somebody who is that trustworthy and also that capable of going in and capturing an audience and talking in front of 50 real estate agents and engaging them, who also knows, the business itself and knows their stuff, who you can also trust and not just say, you know what, I've met all these people, I'm going to go try to do this on my own.
Of course. Yeah. That would be, I think I'm reading the mind of our audience right now, is that, they would be very, very hesitant to bring in and basically hand the keys to the castle to somebody when you already have a robust business, and then giving them a percentage of that on the trust factor. They're going to, you have a different scenario because it sounds like you have a personal relationship with this person, sort of what they're about. So that piece of it's good. There's not an easy way to do this. I went through the exact same thing, very similar thing, and the guy that I hired is very similar. I've known him I went to college with him, so I've known him for a long time, and I know what he's capable of. And I was able to, he walked into instant pay on stuff that he did not generate.
Correct.
But I want him outgrowing the team. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do it. You can certainly pay somebody on, give them a higher percentage, but it's on the marginal growth of the team. So if let's say you're at 100 million, you bring somebody in and you pay them a bigger percentage on the amount of growth from that. I think at the end of the day, you don't want people to be oh, that's my deal or that's my relationship, and having to track that and the pain of tracking it is just way too complicated. So I just say pick a number where you think that it's going to be motivating for them, but not cripple you from an income standpoint, and just go from there and have everybody on the same team. And if Bob gets one, great. If James gets one, great. We all get paid the same.
Exactly. And that's intentionally why we've set it up in the way that we have, because I don't want to create competition within my team.
Yeah.
So I don't want to be competing for a deal or a relationship with somebody who is also building my business and my reputation and name. And yet, has it cost me more money because I had to, this honestly took about 2 years to really start to finally pay off. So I probably lost hundreds of thousands of dollars for those first 2 years where I could have done probably the same or close to the same amount of business without that person. Yep. Right. But you have to look long term. If you're in this industry and you're not, in and out of it when rates go up and down, and you're really in this as what I say is, those people that ride out those waves, 2008, all this sort of stuff, the people who are going to ride it out no matter what, because there's really no other option of what else you would do. Those are people that have a career. People that have a job are people who will come and go when the rates go up and down. When it's easy or not easy, they'll either get in or out of the business. You really have to be committed long term, because you have to make commitments both financially and with your time to invest in things that will take years to build. And we're still doing that with other initiatives. We're trying to move our business more in the direction of financial advisors and that type of community, business management firms and whatnot. And that is a long-term plan.
And away from realtors, or at least percentage-wise away from realtors.
Correct. Well, not giving up our core, but what we found is once you get to a certain level, you almost have too many referral sources. Yeah. And that can cripple you. And one of my favorite comments I get from my coach is that most good originators die from starvation. They die from strangulation, meaning they have so many people they have to. What we've tried to do, and this is honestly learning, I've been in this 15 years, I'm constantly evolving and learning new things about how our business works and where we can get it from and where the opportunities are. Yeah. But we've found that our capture ratios are about maybe 30% of what they are when you're dealing with real estate agents, and the cost associated with keeping their attention and keeping them interested. And, you could have one deal where they want to close in, we'll use California timelines. They want to close in 20 days.
Yeah. Oh, so a long close of escrow.
Yeah, and you close in 21, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
And you close in 21, and they're upset with you.
Yeah, of course.
And you say, "Wait a second, we closed in 21 days."
Yeah,
but I want to close in 20, so I'm going to call the 19 other mortgage people who are after my business.
I'm sorry, we make a joke out here about something about Mary, the 7-minute abs, and like everybody's always, I'm going to get the 6-minute abs, and I'm going to do. You can't do abs in 6 minutes. What are you talking about? It's like we have the 10-day close,
or
and
the razors
the 9.5-day close, the 9-day and 2-hour close.
Exactly. It's like the razors. They keep adding more blades and more blades. It's like at some point the razor's gonna be bigger than your face.
That's right. That's right.
So we've just found that community, there are some people who are very loyal to us, who refer every single client to them, and they just don't pay attention to all the noise around them from other people because we've had a relationship with them for 10 years. So we are shifting our business to really focus on those people and to give them some special treatment in terms of things that we'll do for them, and sharing their listings on our social media and all sorts of other stuff that we're only giving to like our top 25 referral sources because they're our biggest advocates. Yeah. And we're really trying to focus more time on rewarding those people who are our biggest advocates and not getting bogged down with wasting our time with people who will ask us for things or ask us to pay for events or home buyer seminars or whatever, where they're just digging in your pockets.
Sure.
That doesn't happen with the financial planning community in the same way, in my opinion. And the capture ratios are so much higher, but the barrier of entry is higher because these are people that deal with financial matters. You really got to know your stuff and be convincing with your pitch. So you have to really refine that. But we've, again, our business is always evolving, and that's a plan that we put in place just in the last 6 months to go after that business more. And we're putting our money where our mouth is, and we're saying no to agents that, aren't really producing leads or business from us, but they want us to sponsor their broker's preview. And pay $200 for food so that 15 of their friends can come and eat food and pretend to look at your name on the financing sheet and then that's it.
The plate lickers, that's what we call them.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And the people who will, ask you to pay for the event, and then the buyers come and they don't make any effort to refer them to you. It's it's an unfortunate situation, but it's sort of become commonplace for the real estate agent community to dig in the pockets of mortgage people. And you get to a certain point of your career where you don't have to get business from everyone. Yeah. And you can, to a certain degree, pick and choose, although you don't want to turn business away. Sometimes the amount of effort it will take you to get an actual deal that will stick from an agent could be so many hours that, when you look at it, you're getting paid under minimum wage for all the work you did for that person. So we're getting better at tracking that, knowing where our business is coming from. We also track literally how much money we have spent on each agent's activities and marketing. We track it by real estate office. And we also track, and that sort of led us to some findings that, we're spending way too much money on this office relative to the amount of business we're getting out of it. They want us to come and do a presentation at an office meeting. They'll give us 5 minutes talk at an office meeting, but they want us to pay $1,000 to bring lunch for 100 people. Yeah. You learn, you go, and always have to evolve in this business. I mean, everyone who's been in it more than 30 seconds knows that the only constant in this business is change, whether it be regulatory or rates or whatever. There's never a moment where things just sit still.
Yeah, it's like kids. As soon as you get used to a certain stage, they zip right past it, right?
Oh yeah, I got 2 of my own. So yeah. Exactly.
Great. Yeah. So a couple of additional questions I wanted to sort of dive into. What numbers are you talking about? Like what have you averaged volume wise? I mean, what's your average loan amount? You said 170 to 300 deals. So I'm guessing you're doing some pretty hefty volume from a dollar volume standpoint.
Yeah. So our average loan amount has risen because of a few factors. So it used to be somewhere around 400,000. So we deal with people of all shapes and sizes. So we'll deal with the first time buyers, with as expensive as properties are in the markets we deal with, we, in some cases we'll see $100,000 loan, but that's pretty rare for us. And it's usually somewhat of a favor to an agent or whatever it may be, or it may be somebody who's buying $1 million property and is just shy of being able to buy it in cash.
Yeah.
And real estate agents still don't understand that we get paid on the loan amount, not on the purchase price like they do.
I just sent you $1 million deal.
Right. Exactly. Well, that's great. I'm making $5 on it.
Right.
If you want to share your commission with me, that'd be great.
Yeah, right.
It's illegal, so don't.
Yeah.
So our business, I would say now our average loan amount is probably risen to about 650-ish.
Yeah.
For two reasons. Number one, we've made a concerted effort. The majority of our business kind of started. I got my start in Brooklyn, where the prices are marginally lower, although they've really sort of caught up to Manhattan, or are catching up very quickly. We made an intentional shift to try to get more business from Manhattan, whereas previously it was maybe about 20% of our business. Now it's about 50-50.
Oh, wow.
And we're going after offices, which are, again, very ultra competitive. Like we'll go into some of these offices and there will literally be a massive holder of business cards that literally has 10 different mortgage companies' cards in there. So it's very competitive. Everyone wants to get into these offices, but we've made a concerted effort and consistent effort through education of the agents, which has been our angle in, and we're very methodical about it.
How are you tracking market share? Just like number of total transactions that are happening in your market versus what you guys are doing on any given day?
Well, we tend to do it more office by office. So if we're looking at real estate agents specifically, we have very good relationship with a lot of the managers of certain real estate offices in New York City. And so we'll ask them, how many transactions did you guys do this month that were financed? And they have that data, and they're more than happy to share it in most cases. And so we'll know how much of it we captured. And like for example, there was a period of time in New York City a couple years ago where if you weren't an all cash buyer, you almost had no shot at getting an accepted offer. And there were people things destroying their finances to be able to become a cash buyer because they were so desperate to buy a property. And if you came in with a pre-approval letter, usually people think, hey, that's a good thing. In this case, it was like the scarlet letter. It's like getting financing. Oh, we'll just go to one of the other 9 all cash offers that we have that are above asking.
Yeah.
So you have to also judge it based on the market conditions and how many are actually financed, where there's potentially an opportunity for you to have a transaction there if you're in the mortgage side and not just on the real estate side where they get paid regardless.
Makes sense.
And they prefer the cash deals because it's easier for them.
Yeah, of course.
So you have to be mindful of what's going on in the market. So we tend to track things more office by office. We're targeting certain offices around the city where we have good relationships and knowing how much business they did, what percentage we got. And there was this period of time, as I mentioned, where so many of them were cash, where there were, in one of the offices that we do a lot of business in, I think there was a period of time over the course of 6 months where 80 to 90% of the transactions they did were all cash.
Wow.
So if you're just looking at your volume numbers, you can't really gauge what's going on. And, none of us, we all may have egos or whatever in our business, but nobody is big enough to say that your individual business is significant enough to gauge over the entire market of a city.
Of course not.
None of us are that important. I hate to say it, myself
especially
included.
Not in a big city, like maybe a little bit more so in a tiny little town if you've got a town.
It could be, yes, that's correct. Right.
Yeah, for sure.
It's just impossible to gauge it. You'll never know how many transactions are going on. Although, to be honest, there are some real estate firms that put out that data in their quarterly reports.
I guess if you're just using the same metric every time, pulling from the same source, then you kind of take some of the noise out there. And at the end of the day, you're looking at trends, not the actual numbers. But again, another reason to not base somebody's comp plan on some of those fuzzy things that are outside of control. I always like basing somebody's comp plan on something that they have, a little bit more stake in or control over. So
and you want to create an environment where everybody's working towards the same goal. And, have I paid people more than they quote unquote should have been paid for the difference in what we got? Yeah, there have been times. But there have also been times where for some reason I had maybe something going on personally or, had just had a kid or whatever, where I wasn't fully in tune at my best, but that's part of being on a team and why everyone is treated the same way. And
it smooths
you foster that environment. It
smooths
really
out some
creates
of those numbers, right?
Right. And you don't create competition within your own team. That's the worst thing you can do. Competing for deals or relationships. Hey, that was mine. That was my relationship, not yours. No, we work together, and that camaraderie that we have to build it together gives us both momentum, and we play off of each other. So he may know one agent in an office, I know another one. We tell those two to get together, and they're like, "Oh, I know Gavi, I know Mark. That's great. These guys are amazing." And then they see that we're on the same business card, so they put us together in their minds.
Yeah.
Not that we're competing loan officers at the same bank, which I think sometimes you have that with other firms. So we're really adamant about promoting the team as opposed to promoting ourselves individually. Yeah. And we do also give our loan officers who work the deals for us, once the lead has been generated, we give them opportunities for them to go out and get some of their own business. And we sometimes tee them up for opportunities that for whatever reason, we don't feel like we're going to go after with the tenacity that it needs. It's still a successful opportunity for somebody to come in if they really have the time and energy to do it. But for whatever reason, we've chosen not to.
Yeah, either
so
overflow
I'll tee up those opportunities for other people, even though I could keep it for myself. You always want to have people feel like there's more potential out there for them. It's human nature to want to have opportunity, and the more opportunity you provide, the more value providing. As crazy as it sounds, because you're paranoid about them figuring out how to do it on their own. Yeah. The more they want to stay, because you're teeing them up for things that they wouldn't normally be able to do. And they're having the security of the team and knowing that the phone is going to be ringing, even if they're not out there making it ring, while also being given the opportunity to go out and get
at the end of the day, it's also coming from a place of power, and instead of being a place of being non-powerful, in a place of abundance, and instead of a place of scarcity. Like, I would love if one of the people working on my team felt like they could do it. They can go out on their own, and they felt confident enough that if I brought them on from scratch, they felt confident enough that they were able to see an opportunity and had enough confidence to go try to do it on their own. Like, to me, it would hurt to lose somebody, especially if they're that good. But I don't worry about that. In fact, I would celebrate that and wish them the best, because like that's what you want. Like, you're not going to have somebody on your team forever. Like, you don't want somebody who's just complacent on it. And if they last for a long time and they don't want to do it on their own, and they value security over upside, then that's the perfect person. I always think that the perfect pay structure for somebody is where you're paying them more than what the market would pay them, but you're getting more from them than what you're paying them.
Right.
So there's like this middle ground of like, you're quote unquote overpaying for what the market would pay, but you're getting way more value out of that than what it's actually costing you. And those are perfect tires.
Yes, exactly. And that's where the magic happens, because people are still motivated to do more, but they're also not competing with you. And it's taken time to build that type of team, but we've got a super solid team where everyone is motivated and looking for opportunities for themselves, but still at the same time, this is the culture we've created, still at the same time understanding that part of their job is to help promote the team and the team name. It's not just all about promoting themselves.
Of course.
But when you create the opportunity for them to do both, they see the value in it, the security in the team, but also the opportunity in building some of their own book where they do get paid a little bit more, but it's through their own sources, and teeing them up for opportunities that they wouldn't have had on their own, that you've decided for whatever reason is not right for you.
And that they'll probably end up working a little bit harder than you would anyway, for whatever reason too. So,
absolutely.
Hey, Mark, I want to make sure, again, I'm cognizant of your time. We're coming up on an hour here, and so I want to wrap it up. But I got to say that this is our first conversation that we've had, and it's uncanny how many kind of coincidental commonalities that we share. I moved from Northern California to Southern California, and so not across the country, but I was working the Northern California market and still continue to work it remotely. So we have that remote aspect of it. I hired a business development manager who goes out and does these things on my team. We both agree on spending way too much for staff, so that's a good commonality. So I really, really enjoyed the conversation, and I think you're a fascinating guy to talk to, and I think that our audience will get a whole lot out of it, and I hope that we can. I know we're in the same market, so I would hope to be able to get together with you at some point and maybe have you back on the podcast down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love doing this stuff. I feel like, there's not a lot of ways to give back to the community in this business, because everybody is, sort of looking out for themselves. But, I don't mind sharing ideas and, different things that I've been through. And, I think hopefully in the bigger scheme of things raises the bar in our industry and gets the right people doing this who really belong, and the ones who don't, can go on their merry way and try the next hot thing.
Whatever the next, go invest in Bitcoin.
Exactly.
Right?
I mean, nothing bad ever comes out of sharing ideas, of having conversations with other successful loan officers and ones who are still starting out. It's what gives you the warm and fuzzy feeling, which in this business it's hard to find.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you carving out an hour out of your busy time, and it's a Friday, so go spend some time with your kids, and you have a great weekend, and we will talk to you soon.
Okay. All right. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
The information contained in this podcast presentation is for business and professional use only to assist real estate professionals and is not an advertisement to extend consumer credit as defined by Section 226.2 of Regulation Z. Arklatex Financial Services, LLC, NMLS number 22142 DBA Benchmark Mortgage makes no representations or warranties of any kind, expressed or implied, about the completeness, reliability, suitability, or availability with respect to the information, products, or services. All loans subject to borrower qualifying. Other restrictions may apply. Branch Manager Andrew Sauce, NMLS number 259002. Branch located at 140 Newport Center Drive, Suite 210, Newport Beach, California 92660. Contact the branch by calling 949-258-9555. Equal housing opportunity.